Well, welcome to the Dream Labs at Dr. Contrast Live. Back on tune here, and just kind of an interesting little intro here. I'm going to take a look at, if you notice the title of today's stream is the 1930 Bentley Blue Train Special. And I just want to say something here before we begin going through some of the exercises here. It was very interesting, for example, that I've spoken for some time in the streams about getting into some Bentley processing and doing some work with them, but I've always really been intrigued by this machine. The Bentley 1930 Bentley Blue Train is an exceptional piece of architecture. I mean, when you see that car live, it's an absolutely massive monster, but it has such a presence about it. I consider it to be the original hot rod, and I think the history behind it might be interesting to you as well. We have not any images of we have not seen an image of the Bentley 1930 Bentley Blue Train. Please take a look at it. It's a very long hood, very imposing, low upper, high belt line, bustle back tail section on it, floating fenders, spare tires on both right and left side, passenger side and driver side, but an extremely unique configuration. And I thought for some time it would be kind of nice to maybe put on a design challenge to see what would take place. How would you recreate that program or that look today? And I'll tell you right now, I think, hey, Demetrius, how are you, man? Good to see you. How's everything? Thank you for joining me, Chief. Long time no speak. Hope you're well. And when I go back to this Bentley, I've always felt that was one of the most imposing automobile pieces of architecture ever designed. And credit to W.O. Bentley for being a real visionary and putting together a package that was extremely, at the time period, in the 30s, very revolutionary. He didn't receive a lot of criticism for the actual package itself, but the success of that car still remains probably the most coveted coupe in the industry today as far as ownership goes from individuals that have purchased this thing. I don't know how many are left in the globe, but there's very few of them left. And but again, let me give you a real brief overview of why the Blue Train Special. Hey, Jeff, how are you, man? Did it have any vinyl-clad sides? I don't know if it did, Jeff. It probably might have some caning, but it was all sheet metal stamping. I know that. But good to have you on board, Jeff, and you as well, Demetrius. But I think one of the neat things about the whole Bentley process was this. I mean, when you look at, I've made some notes here. In 1930. An individual named Wolf Bernardo, who was probably a very wealthy industrialist that had the heir to the Kimberley the Kimberley diamond mines in South Africa. A very wealthy individual, and he was very much a Bentley fan from the get-go, and he became good friends with W.O. Bentley over the period of time. And Bentley hired him as a driver, for example, during the early 30s. Because Bentley at that time was moving into racing machines, and then this gentleman, Wolf Bernardo, had a lot of experience in some small races in Europe, etc. So Bentley brings him on board, and he was in Cannes on a vacation, and someone brought up the fact that there's been a real controversy about. There are two manufacturers from England, both Rover and Albus, have taken on this Blue Train Special race from Cannes to Calais, France, which is the south coast, Monte Carlo up into maybe mid France and so forth. So here Bernardo hears the story and says, wait a minute here. I mean, the Albus and Rover have already done this, and then they set the record. No, they didn't. He was told it was not set a record. Pictures of it looked like flat matter behind the bonnet. Yeah, it's really a flat mat system all the way around. Very spooky looking machines, Jeff. You're right, but so imposing, don't you think? I mean, it's just all the character: long hood, chrome grille, big huge wheels, fenders, floaters. Side wheel, great low body upper, just really terrific proportion. To recreate that today, it might be very difficult, and I'm taking on a real challenge. I'm going to try and do something here to kind of bring it into this modern generation. Can it be done? I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, it might be just, oh my goodness, what a very valiant effort, but thanks, but no thanks. But I'm hoping to get some feedback from you and Demetrius about the fact, is there an approach we can take here to give it some sort of presence today? If not, we'll move on to another subject matter in another stream. But back to the whole story, buddy. So he's sitting in this yacht, and someone brings up the fact that there's a Blue Train race from Cannes to Calais, and two manufacturers have already done it. So I said, no, I'm going to take my Bentley, and I'm going to bet 200 pounds that I can beat the time factor and set the record from Cannes to Calais better than they did. So he took on the bet, and they helped kind of the wager down. And the next thing you know, it was a situation where the Blue Train left the station the following day at 5:45 p.m. from Cannes. At the same time, Bernardo left his hotel, went to pick up his own personal Speed 6, and started driving from the route at the same time the train started, he started the race from the hotel. So on the story goes. So the point was made that all of a sudden, He leaves, for example, amazing same time, and they tracked it, and he was so quick to get from Cannes to Calais. He decided, you know what, I'm going on to London. I'm going to make this a real stretch. For 200 pounds, if I can make this bet happen, I'm going to do this. So he gets to Calais very early, moves on, for example, from Calais to London, had to cross the channel. He went through all kinds of difficulties. He had flat tires, puncture problems, fog and rain going through Paris and France and so forth. But to get there, so he got on the barge and goes over, for example, crosses the channel, has all kinds of custom problems when he gets to the English side, and he had to force his way through and explain what he was doing, so the customs officials let him go. And the long story short was because of this, again, this is why, that's why to me, this vehicle has got such great mystique, because it's only one of a kind, and it did this, and it's overwhelming at the time period. So what it did was, it finally got to the place, I've just got a note here, it finally arrived. He finally got clearance. He went from I think it was Greenwich all the way up into London, and sat there, parked in front of the Conservative Club in London, 4.5 minutes ahead of the blue train arriving in London. It arrived at 4 minutes. He arrived in London at 3:20, and the blue train special from from Cannes arrived 4 minutes later at 3:24. So he broke the record, won his 200 pounds. But here's the best part of the whole story. The British press found out about the fact, and Bentley found out about the fact he had done this. He didn't tell anybody about it. He had done this. So the British motoring group fined him, Barnato, 160 pounds for racing on private roads in London. So, through the pre-war years on public roads. So that was a fine that led to him. But to me, just a fascinating story about a machine that was built for racing purposes, but the Barnato took it to another level altogether. Anyway, the last comment I'll make here before we get to show you some of the images I put together here. The last image, the last comment made from that, he was fined. They were not allowed him to show, W.O. Bentley was not allowed to show any of his salon work or design work at the Paris Auto Show, the Salon in Paris in 1930-31. But the greatest part of the story, I think, is the fact that when it was all said and done, it came back 1,000-fold that there was a big debate about, all right, what was this? Was it a Gurney Nutting coach, or was it a Mulliner Salon edition? We're still not sure whether Gurney Nutting did it or whether Mulliner did it. Mulliner was his trim system. Mulliner was, at that time, the interior trim supplier to Bentley, W.O. Bentley. And he's claiming, for example, that his car set the record. It was his coachwork that did the job. On the other end of the spectrum, Gurney Nutting is a manufacturer back in that time period. They were just getting started, and all of a sudden they moved on, for example, from the Bentley process. They did some work for Bentley on some coach work, but their claim to fame was the very famous Rolls-Royce Bustleback 30s and 40s, some of the most elegant-looking surface and forms done for Rolls-Royce. Those are all Gurney Nutting chassis pieces, so really interesting set of history here. So the debate goes on whether it was a Mulliner or whether it was a Gurney Nutting. My bet on the fact that it was a Gurney Nutting, and for this reason, if you look at that car, there's a tail sight. It's called a Bustleback. There's a little load-on trunk. I think Gurney Nutting started that process, and they began to capitalize that in their manufacturing cycle for nobility and elite systems in Europe, or nobility in Europe for coach building, and that became part of their signature. Very long sloping rear deck on it, and a little Bustleback trunk section became their signature piece. So let me show you where I started. I started just some elevation studies here. So thank you for your patience with me showing or describing that story about the Blue Train Special. To me, it's a very unique piece of history, an automotive history. So here we are. So I went back in here, for example, and here's just a page of just real fast, quick and elevation studies here. And I want to be very candid here. The elevations are very deceptive in a sense, because what's happening with the fender surface? What are the surfaces doing up on top of the hood? What about the upper? I really try to play into this whole idea of the Bentley, the Special itself had a very vertical windscreen, but I wanted to lean forward a little bit, get more speed to it, and then I still picked up the sunshade, that very quick upper. And one of the great features of that car, again, was the fact that it had a very high belt line and really low upper. And been described, I've seen it from design staff, and I saw it over in Europe when I was in Germany. It's an extremely imposing, I mean, really high belt line. And then from the shoulder to the top of the machine, it's almost a head height. It's really low, etc. So it's really cool. So I try to pick up the same theme here in some of these elevations. A little quicker on the fastback, a little bit of that muscle back here in the trunk area. Maybe some graphic interface from off the pillar, bringing it down to the body side, and then letting that floating fender come up here and just kind of fade into the body side as you go into it here. So these are little studies coming together with some posing. And again, really taking advantage of that whole really quick upper, that little bit of a bustle back, and a really long hood. And the most important feature to me was to get that windscreen to lean forward just a little bit, give a little bit more presence of speed to it. So these are real quick pencil sketches, just looking in and notice it's really interesting too. When you go to a rear 3/4 on that thing, you try to describe the shape. That leaning forward of windscreen is extremely, we're so typical of going in the other direction, going from front to back. When you reverse it, that looks really clumsy back here. So that was a real battle in terms of putting together a series of sketches that would make that work from a point of view of just being visual. So again, the pursuit today is there a way to make this Bentley Blue Train Special look more contemporary? I don't know. I'm going to be very candid right up front. It is such a great machine. I don't know if you can do anything with it to make it, because if you try to put certain cliches on it, all of a sudden it just destroys the entire process of what Bentley processed and that they did back in the 30s. So let's give it a try. And at the end of it all, if Jeff and Demetrius, if you're still with me, if you give me a thumbs up on one or the other, or we want to drop the whole thing, I'm happy either way. I just know it's going to be a real tough challenge. It's a great piece of architecture. There's phase one. So let's go back to this a bit. Then I went into some little 3/4 studies here. It wasn't bad. Notice if you tighten down the view a little bit, it gets a little bit more acceptable. And notice, let's go back to this one just for a moment. When you really rotate the whole shape and go almost full rear 3/4 and get behind it all quite a bit, that whole area, the A pillar, really looks clumsy. It looks like it's actually fractured or it's out of perspective. So what we want to do, I came back in and just just modified the view a little bit and just kind of turned it a little bit so it's almost 3/4 rear, but a real tight view. Not bad proportionally. I mean, it started to take on some character, but yet again, my question as we go through the stream today is, could this be done today in a contemporary format? Is it too far outside the realm of interface or retrofactoring into it to make it become present in this culture today? I don't know. It'd be one of a kind type to deal with, but again, something to think about. And again, I thought about this and putting this whole program together. I've been working on this for the last 5-6 weeks. How do you present it? What are we looking for? What are the ground rules we're going to deal with? Are we going to take that same 30s aura and begin to bring it into the contemporary generation, or do we kind of abandon it altogether and just do a facelift on the 30s? It can go either way, but I'm convinced, for example, and I'm not going to tip my hand here yet, but I'm more convinced that this is such a presence, such a powerful statement. No matter what you do to it, it's not going to be a Bentley any longer. It's going to be just another what if, how come, what for? So all that, again, notice 3/4 rear, not bad in here. That leaning front quarter, that A pillar starts to make some sense. And flaring out the fenders to get to get some of the floating fenders away, but kind of blended in the body form, start to work, and then picking up on the cooling system and the louvers along the base, kind of lighten the body form up, starts to make a little bit of sense. The elevation looks great. It's imposing. I mean, is it still, could this be again the way to look at a Bentley 1930 and bring it into this generation by keep it as that 1930 overall system or process, and yet give it the same, maybe a little bit of an upgrade in this generation. So what do you think, Jeff? You're still with me? And then Demetrius, feel free to kind of chime in here as we go through the process. I'm going to need your help, obviously, throughout the course if you're still with me today. Your input's going to be extremely helpful. So let's go. There's a study here put together. And another we'll look at it. Now, this is where it gets a little bit on the testy side. Now you kind of bring it into the fact that all of a sudden, do we go back in, keep the power dome in place? Go back to some of the Bentley headlamping, the very large lamping systems on the fenders. Do we kind of crown the shape off a little bit? It started to make a little bit of sense. It was not too bad. And again, that same leaning full forward windscreen on it, again, it kind of give it a bit of a presence. It was for me a significant step, but was it really what we're looking for? Does it change the overall personality? Because the fenders are gone, the power dome's gone. Yeah, it's more of a Rolls-Royce type or current Bentley piece with a very strong radiator system, but it doesn't have that same fluid presence, or what I refer to as that real almost evil look that the Blue Train Special had. So there's a sketch we worked with there. So there's the front 3/4 and a little bit of interior study, just kind of mute. Then went back again, looking at some very, again, much more contemporary pieces, trying to get a little more simplified with it. Again, a little bit of a whale's tail back in through here, drop that, still that same bustle back, but it's more integrated now. Come off the upper, drop into the rear trunk section, lighting system, exhaust. And then notice that fender comes back and just kind of, in the plane, it just kind of moves back into the body form and begins to form the floating fender. And again, that same forward-leaning windscreen that just does the job. And this is what it might look like from the front 3/4. Is it too advanced? Is it forced? Do we need things like this? A very typical cliche. Is this more like it, where you've got an actual fender system? Because the original fender came over the top of it and just kind of flared back a little bit, and that was it. It was just a cycle fender, period. That covered did the job. This gets a little more elaborate. Now, are these too small? Do we pinch this surface in a little bit more in the plan view and then put these lamps up on top and give more boldness to them? These are the things that I have wrestled with, and I mean that sincerely. I mean, really did not wrestle with, but really took careful scrutiny to kind of go through to see what we're working with here. It was overall a fun program to work with, but extremely difficult to kind of find the right balance. Where are we taking this from 1930 into 2023 or 2040 or whatever it may be into an advanced vehicle piece? Very difficult. So let me move along here. Same kind of setup again. You notice now this is from this page here. The decisions are made. Yeah, you know, it's a little bit too fancy, a little bit more fluid. It's lost some of that Bentley presence of the current architecture. So I went back in and said, let's go back and simplify a little bit more. So I came back in and noticed a little bit stiffer in the power dome. Got back to the typical lamping that are now in the GTs and some of the other machines that are out there to the spur, etc., coming back to some of their heritage. And this one was kind of an interesting approach too. Notice in both elevations, kind of interesting. We still kept that long hood, and again, that's done. This one we leaned the windscreen forward a little bit, and in this one we kind of brought it back into more contemporary, like the upper section here, about a 45 or a 50 to 60 degree windscreen angle. Changed a little bit. It's not too bad up front here, but again, it gets a little clumsy again. And again, this one was getting a lot more power pod in terms of the lamping system. The original Bentley Speed 6 had that very, very bulbous radius type large lamp. Maybe we pull that back and blend it into the fender form. So this had a start to look at maybe something that could maybe work, but again, it still didn't have that same kind of guts or that punch to the original 30 had. So let me stop her for Jeff and Demetrius, if you're still there. Anybody? What do you think? Making sense so far? I mean, we're looking at something that could be applicable, or is it just a little bit of an outside the stretch? So feel free to pipe in if you're still there, gang. So here we are. Let's go back in again here. Let's go back now. From that, it's interesting. I got to this stage and I thought, you know, as a gangster, yeah, it does. It is a gangster very much, so Demetrius. It's very much, that's what it was back in the 30s, too. It was the original, it was outside the box. It was such a departure from current technology back then, or manufacturing skills. It was a real bandit, and it maintained that presence down through the years. It still remains a gangster car. In fact, a lot of the manufacturers here in the country, like Lincoln, Cadillac, etc., began to duplicate that body form back in the late 30s and early 40s when Harley Earl came along. That was one of the real signature machines, signature cars that he worked on and worked with to kind of put that presence together for it. So there we are. So and this was an interesting set of circumstances. I thought, you know what? There it is. We've gone that route. Now maybe we kind of flip gears and just go all out and say, you know what? Maybe it's a case of moving into, what do we did this? Got a little more fluid with it and much more contemporary. Does that start to work? I changed the entire format in terms of look. Now I went back to almost like a shooting brake speed form here. And again, a lot more fluid and a lot more lean to the body, a lot softer. Does it look like it's a Bentley? Does it look like a gangster, a 30 type or a Speed 6? I don't know. I mean, this one had, I think, had some presence to it. But if we rolled that upper off and got back that bustle back and through here, that might be kind of a nice theme to play with and not to play with, but to kind of extrapolate or develop a little further with it. It was a difficult, very candid, a very difficult transition for me to say, okay, we stay in the 30s, are we bringing into the modern genre? Do we want to make it more contemporary? Really a delicate line. I'm not really convinced yet that we've gotten the answer. So that's why I thought I'd put it on stream today and get some input from you all as to what you felt, yeas and nays. So from that point, I went right back and said, okay, let's go back and get a nice three-quarter study here. Maybe it's just a very simple salon like this. Maybe it's a nice three-quarter sketch where you've got the same vertical upper, that four-low lean, more contemporary front end with new lighting and so forth. But again, it just didn't look, funny to say this for me, and I'm being very honest at all costs, it just didn't have that same Bentley presence. You lose that fact that there's that fender, then there's a spare tire, then there's that vertical upper and that bustle back and that very strong power dome, the very large lighting and lamping. Those elements, as far as I'm concerned, are absolutely priceless. Now, do you change them? And again, that's a real, sorry for being redundant here, but that's a real dilemma. I mean, I took on a real challenge here, and I'm glad I did, because it really taught me a lot about, all right, there are some things you can really begin to modify, and there's something you better not violate. And this might be one of them. I don't know. But if it all said and done, if it does turn out, for example, that the Bentley piece stays as is, what I'm going to do really is do a really nice illustration of the actual Speed 6, the 1930 version, and put that up on my website in my store. So anyway, here we go. So I started a whole family of forms here. I thought, let's go back, keep it more fluid, more to the line of where we are with the 30 system. Go and take that, but there's another sketch done. Then move from that. Notice the difference in the lamping. Let's get these back in the same image on screen there. Pretty close. Notice I went from that very buried lighting system, halogen type, up on top in the fender form, then went to this process where we actually put that shape in a little bit more lean. Notice the windshield a little quicker, brought into the actual cowl itself, or the body side, and put the louver system back into it. Kept the power dome, and then tried to integrate the lighting into the fenders itself. And I'm still not, I'm really not convinced. I really do miss that whole idea, that glory of those big, large lamps. Is there a way to do that without getting too imposing with it? So another variation of the theme here. So let's go move on here. Then I thought, you know what? Once I got to that phase, I thought maybe the idea is to be a little bit more fluid with it, a little looser with it, and explore some things in a rapid sketch format, and not be so conscious of keeping all these elements in mind. So let's try this. So I went from those generations, from these two, which are almost going back to the throwback body form, the actual scale of that machine itself. It was a huge machine, powerful, but the power to me was the presence of the design: low upper, high belt line, strong long hood, power dome, great lighting. I mean, louvered and vented and cooled and sort of beautiful. And the interior was even more spectacular. Passenger seat was there, driver seat was there, but the rear three-quarters was called like a rotated, what they call it, like a vanity seat, where it actually rotated 90 degrees, which gave them more room to drop that upper off to get that real quick slope on the roof. So I went back to this. This is when we started. From that point on, I thought, maybe we go a little more contemporary, try to bring into more of a genre here that might fit today's paradigm, if it's possible. So I went back into the whole sketch process and started to put together a whole series of sketches like this. There's my first pass at it. Now maybe that starts to take on a real, maybe a bit of a character. It's contemporary looking. From my point of view, from where they were in the 30s, so to speak, very, very sloped front end, just chisel it off a little bit, put that Bentley lighting back in there. I mean, this started to make some, the quicker I went with this, funny situation here. The less time I spent trying to think about all these elements that made this special, so special. And just what the form and shape, and then maybe abbreviated the hood a little bit, but really sloped the windshield a little further forward, and not so much hood to it, but maybe a little bit more of today's presence to it. It started to help it a little bit. And then the fade here, the fender coming on, this section would come along, obviously, over the top, drop a little bit, flare up, then drop, and slowly but surely begin to meld back into the body side. So I tried to pick up that same fender form that the original had in the 30s, but yet not as dramatic as a cycle fender. And then open up the rear wheel with that same overall blister on the back end of that thing. The rear tires were also fendered, but they were built into the body. So this kind of justifies that rear three-quarter study of that guy there. So, but it's all here. There was the first pass at it. So there's one. Then I went to this. All of a sudden, a little bit more rakish, a little bit more aggressive in terms of body side. Maybe it's not so stiff going through. Like, we brought that hood line through, but then kick the belt line up a little bit. A little bit more presence to it. Brought some of the cooling down below and kept a little bit of the. Notice the fender flare is still there. This comes back and it rolls out and comes back. And this blisters out and back to the body form. Blisters out again. It's very subtle back and through. Just a real little bit of a round to it. So it has that same presence to it, but it felt a little bit more, and then really taking advantage of climbing up that column, really lifting that up a little bit and going back to a much quicker windscreen. And again, a little bit of venting and cooling system here. And again, back to the current present Bentley headlamp system, and then very large wheels, and just real quick sketches, a lot more widow's peak or cow catcher up front, kind of give it, because the original Bentley had that same cow catcher, but it was a lot flatter, came out and began to pick up the chassis components where they bolted the body form onto it. So there's another real rapid sketch here. So there we are there. And then another one, again, a little bit more, again, back to that same forward slant on this thing. And, the windscreen changing a really, really radical drop into a long hood. And then again, filling the forms on through and keeping much more of its independent fender, an independent rear section of this thing. This actually should open up. So we have the same setup back here, and that same kind of, just to add that little touch there, where you've got the same set of. And again, something about that maybe if you look at what happened here, let me do this, see if this helps. If you look what's happening here, it's pretty interesting. But when you start to put that upper onto it again, I don't know. I still don't know if that forward lean is the right way to take this approach to it. I think there's a lot more spike to it now. We're going to give it that kind of look first. A lot more slope to it, much quicker. Maybe it's not so stiff or so gigantic in terms of monolithic looking, but maybe it's more fluid now, but it has the same kind of, possibly the same Bentley input into it that gives it that special look to it. It's a Blue Train special look to it. Oh, by the way, too, one last feature note, too. The original Bentley, W.O. Bentley's original Speed 6 was done in British Racing flat green. You're right, Jeff. But after Bernardo won that, placed that bet and won it, and that train race from Cannes to London, all of a sudden, since he beat the Blue Train, they changed the marketing on the whole process and it presented the 1930 Bentley Blue Train Special. And then they marketed the whole idea of having beaten the train from Calais to London. So here we are. Another little thumbnail sketch here. Real loose, very exploratory. Let's go back in again. Here's another one. Now I really went shooting brake kind of thing. It's almost very, I don't know how you feel, guys, but this one had a bit of it's kind of an interesting present. Little step kick here. Maybe I take this shape and come off the rear quarter for entry and egress. But there was something about that form. And what do you think, guys? I'm sorry for job boarding it, but I really need to have your help on this thing. This has been a real transition. I gave myself a real test, and so far I might be failing it. I'm not quite sure, but it's been a great journey because you start to think about these great things that were done. Think about this. That vehicle was designed in the 30s, and it was all handcrafted. Incredible technology. Big, huge engine, very powerful. But the presence of the forms itself were really, there was a departure. And it really set lecture in a whole new plan and a path because of the Gurney netting and the Milner information. So it was input. Great stuff. So what do you think? Merritt, if you're still there, anybody, please? I really need your help. This is going to be something I think it's going to be a very, very decisive piece here. This one, to me, had a little bit more of a very almost sheer look to it. It almost came back to that original Speed 6 of the 30s. Very, very architecturally stiff all the way through the power dome, very, very blocky. But notice there's a real subtle things happening here in the form of the fender. This rolls over, and the little highlight will come in through. It's just a real subtle return to that bulb back into the rear quarter. So there's some things, real subtle things that might be worthwhile exploring in time to come here once we put this whole program together. So that, there again, real loose sketches. That was it. And then last but not least, getting a lot more aggressive now. Look at that. All of a sudden, and this is the idea of getting that floating fender piece. We actually come off the cowl itself and really roll that surface out and let it fade out. And then this would be a real, almost like the plan view, a floating piece. The plan view, the fenders would be outboard and the body form inboard. So if you look at this in the plan view, this surface kicks back in and it picks up the body form. So it has some of that same 30s character to it, but it's more imposing now. It's very blockish and very bold looking. And again, it came back to the same Bentley lighting and so forth. And again, that really long sloping hood, and then this would be all power dome here, for example, and then the actual texture of the grille. So, anybody? Sorry here, gang. I've exhausted the sketch, but I just want to say something else too. Let's do this. Let's try this. If we were to take a look at some of this stuff in elevation, I'm going to bring a couple of sketches up here. If you look at this one, let me just look at, for example, let's bring this one back up to play. If we looked at that form right there, what that might look like in elevation is this. We took that same shape and said, all right, here it is. Let's give it a ground line. Let's get that gesture down in elevation. See what that does. If I start here with this form here, and I count this guy back. 1, 2, 3, 4. This really stretches this beauty out. Give me that kind of scale to work with her. Put the ground line in place. And then look at this in elevation. What happens here? That line right there becomes, pardon me. What we're going to work on is get that character down into that upper, so the two are going to slope together, but they're going to really like the siding on this one. Do you think it's pretty interesting? This guy here? Pretty neat, Demetrius. Thank you. That's helpful. I'll just wait for your response. Yeah, hey, thanks very much. So let's look at this in elevation. So I take that same form, and I come off that rocket line here, and I begin to drop that back and just slope that in proportionally. There it is. Then I come back and kick that, and bring it right back to almost mid-wheel. That's that. Now look at the upper piece. Now this is the fender foot. Now if we pick up the upper piece and then bring that into play, it does this now. It comes up, rolls over the top of that, and it gets extremely quick windscreen. So it's about what? Right about there. So if I come back to that, right here, windscreen, and slope that back, and come back in here and roll this off. And again, get that real high belt line to come through here with that point right there. And then this upper coming in and doing this. All of a sudden, look at the difference. And then again, that little chisel up front, there it is. Then we've got on top, we've got that same louver system happening here. So you have all that, that's where that intake piece is. Then you've got that little return down here. It comes back with a little bit of a cooling and over the top of the fender. Then you put the wheel in place. And this goes back a little further, it gives you a little bit more of a bustle back. Then you get that same large form back here. It kind of blends into that shape. Then again, down the base, it's that. Now, even here, we can come back in and add, if we need to, some of that same device that Bentley had originally. You've got some little grilling work back here. And just do this. You see that all right? There's center line of wheel here. And just give it a whole new look. I don't know. There it is in elevation. It's a two-door. Yeah, he said. Yep. It's a two. Yeah, it's a two-door. Absolutely. It's a coupe, etc. So that would do that one, Demetrius. So in elevation, what we've got here is this. This guy here. So we just created. This is the perspective study, so to speak, and then just a real quick look at what it might look like in elevation. Now, I need to stretch it a little bit more. That doesn't look like it's really that long yet, but to kind of take the proportion change. But this one I thought would be interesting too. This is much more of a shooting brake. So let's say we have that guy. Let's see what we do with this guy. So if we get that down to ground, let me just kind of set up the same set of circumstances here. Let's get this down to ground. And again, bring up the same wheel count. And come back a good 5 count. 1, 2, 3. A little more stretch to it, a little more length. There it is. Come back and reinforce the ground line. Again, now look what happens here. In this shape here, this guy comes right off that fender and goes right uphill and just forms a real straight, almost very fluid line coming out that back side here. So on the front side, let's just do this. Gonna get that up. It does this. Then that windscreen, extremely quick, comes back again here and comes right back to that point right there. So it's almost like a fastback shooting brake. And then again, it really rolls forward, comes out to this chute here, and ends that up. Now notice, there's a line right in through here that down that comes off that fender right through here. That fender comes out just, and what you don't see is that real soft bulb that comes back into that body form here. And off that headlamp line, you've got this, then you've got that lamping system right in there. All of a sudden, I mean, look at that. That's starting to take on some character, I think. This could be interesting. Now, let's come back in through. It does this, and it comes right back and picks up that rear wheel. So it locks right in there, and it comes off the top of that. So that's what that form is doing. Now, let's get that high belt line in place. Now, it does this, comes this. Again, same Bentley round off. There it is there. There it is. Simple. Now, look what that does here. It comes back, and then it comes forward, comes back again. There's the fender there. Is it license plate, fender, off to this. Again, that real subtle shaping through it. Now, if we put a little bit of surface on this, it's actually doing this. Real soft. Real interesting transition there. And it's got this cut back on it. Again, what we need here is a little bit more of that ventilation system like the original 6 had. Speed 6 off the top of that fender. Again, notice the cut line. Again, that same skirt, that could be kind of neat. That skirt comes back down and does this. It provides a little bit of a step for the occupant. What I'm just doing now is that step element. That's this guy right here. This step element is now being illustrated back in through here. So we've got this coming in. Now the dilemma is this still a Bentley? Does one supersede the other? You take the upper, for example, and just bring this a little further and then bustle back it and do this. We have the same character. When you add more with that, I don't know. It's a really tough design problem because, man, that thing is so imposing. I don't know if this is even Bentley-like because you miss that little off. Maybe it drops off and picks up the bustle back again. Or maybe it's a little bit of both. You add that onto it. I don't know. It's a real design. Now let's get that door piece here. There it is. Comes across off the pillar. Picks up the rear view mirrors up on top. More contemporary looking, but this is where that shell, there's that lighting system was right there. And again, this comes right down off of that Porsche here. I don't know. I'm just going to leave that wide open for you guys. I need some help here. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm not convinced that we've really solved the problem. I mean, there's some good exercise being done here, but I think there's some of the positioning, for example, these two forms to me, this one had some presence about it. And I'm going to see if I can get a consensus. If you guys are still there, really appreciate you hanging on here, by the way. Extremely helpful. If you had your druthers, do you think this has some merit? Do these two approaches have some merit? And if not, or let me know. I'll go right back to the typical 6, speed 6, and roll with that one all the way through here. But I just think it'd be kind of fun to take a shot at doing something a little bit more unique with this guy. So there's one approach. And there's the other approach. And then the other hand is this. You can go back to something like, for example, what we did in the first series. Is there something here that kind of has an intrigue to it? I'm not sure. Again, if I were to pick up my druthers on this page here, I think there's something about this form here that does some nice things graphically, but I don't know if that's Bentley. I want to maintain as much of that character as we possibly can. It's a real, as I said, terrific challenge and a great piece of architecture. I mean, I'm glad I took the challenge on, but I want to find a solution here to kind of get this thing resolved here. And then if we, after today's stream, we might go into some subject matter, but I'll come back to it once we get something settled in and begin to place it in order. But again, the thing that I'm really concerned about is that forward lean pillar. Is it that, or do we go back to the typical windscreen that we're showing in this set? And we want to go quicker with it. I don't know. I mean, there's something about this guy here that really looks interesting, especially when you have this whole catwalk coming off of the form and then really rolling into the body side and then coming back in and ducking in again. That whole shape is kind of lifting off, for example, in the plan view. I'll show you real quick if we can get an illustration. Another sheet of paper. If we looked at that first study, let's go back and let's bring this up here. If we look at this one, we look at what's happening in the body form and this guy here, this whole fender system, this thing in the plan view is going to look like this. We came in here, if we have the center line of the vehicle, very quickly go off the hood, into the round, and coming right down to the peak of that thing, and coming right, roll forward with this thing, and really roll that out, and really roll that out. So there's part of it all. And then this flares out just a bit. That flares out a bit, and it comes right on through, and then dives back, and this whole situation here rolls out, and it comes right back and dives into this. Then it comes back to a typical body form. And there's my power dome. There's the actual real shell here. And again, headlamp here, right in, coming off of that same process, comes right out of there, and kicks just a bit. It comes right back into that. That whole shape actually cantilevers right off that section across and drops, comes out. Drops and comes out. So it actually floats off the shape itself. We'll do another little view here. Comes off the power dome here. Comes off of that form, off the fender, drops back, and comes right back in and does this. Right back. So that shape comes right through and follows into the actual form itself. There's the actual half of it. There's the actual speed form. There's a windscreen angle, and there's the actual body form coming out right there, which now gives you the setting for the headlamp. But this thing floats right off the form itself and right back into. Interesting how that drops back. It gives you that body form that's really interesting. There it is. That makes sense, gang? So enough said here for that exercise today. I think it's just a really phenomenal study in terms of what to do with this thing in terms of getting the right format here. So let's go back and just kind of retrace our steps here from front to back, from back to front. And wrapping it all up here, assuming this is a consensus. Get these all together. So, last one we did was this. Or pardon me, reverse that. It was actually this. The last one we did was taking advantage of more contemporary body forms. Let's see what this guy does. Let's see if that's where we ended up. Last sketch. One approach. Have to go, but we'll watch the stream later. Sorry about that. No problem. Hey, good to have you on board, Demetrius. Thanks so much. So we were there. Last, more contemporary. Another variation on that same theme. More contemporary, getting some of that fender form to work for us. Coming back in. Again, full forward windscreen, getting a little more rakish with it. And again, pretty common approach to it all. And then this one was interesting, where it actually has a little more, a very interesting form here. I think the more I see this little shape back and through everything. If I brought this form up and just consistently brought that through, that could be a nice face, nice place to work with. Then over here, and then again, another very simple form as well. That could be very almost quite. If we actually pulled this back and did more than the vertical quarter, it could have some merit to it. Initial line study. I'm going to change the windscreen angle, some of the lamping system. Going back through a little bit of a review here. And then this guy, the same process, the same overall stance of the Bentley boot train special scale-wise, but get a little more. It just didn't feel comfortable. So let's put it that way. Then back into some of the earlier sketches, of trying to make it more contemporary. And then this had some merit to it. Maybe it wasn't quite Bentley yet, but it had some shape in terms of the bustle back and the very high belt line, low upper. Very helpful there. So another study. And we went to this guy, trying to make a little bit more sense out of the same proportion, windshield leaning back a little bit, and some of the current Bentley lighting systems up front, and then putting pod light systems on the fenders themselves to make that kind of function a little bit. And then go back in the elevator three-quarter study. And again, front three-quarter, not bad, but I'm just concerned about the fact a little too fussy. It's a small. Maybe this moves in a little bit more if we continue this program on and do some interesting things with it as well. So that was another three-quarter. And then again, this guy, same, again, now coming back to more of the power dome front end and typical British lighting and so forth, and a little more slope in the actual form itself, and you simplify the forms with the cooling system, the louvers, that made it a benchmark. A little three-quarter study here. I think this is interesting. It's had some nice presence to it. Maybe this is a solution to it. I'm not sure. Again, I'm looking for the voting system to help me along here as we go through it from point to point. So that's another second study we did. And the first one we looked at was this. This is where we started, with just a nice page of elevation sketches based on the present Speed 6 format, what the overall scale was. Then we moved from this phase all the way through to more of a contemporary look. Can you do that with this format? Will this vehicle lend itself to some sort of a contemporary setup in time to come? I'm not really, again, as I said, I'm still going to be working with it. I still want to take a good look at it, but I would really appreciate if you have a moment, if you look at the stream, to give me some input as to which direction you think this ought to take. Do we keep it more fresher statement by just maybe building on some of the things from the 30s, or do we go and throw it out and do a whole new process of this is what the Blue Train special for 1928 might look like, or 1932, or 2020, pardon me, 2020, 2030, just to kind of step it up a little bit, see what we've got with it there. So there we are. That concludes the stream for today. And I want to thank all of you for kind of tuning in. A lot of fun today. And again, as I said weeks ago, we talked about maybe putting this whole process together and doing a little study on the Blue Train special. We've got it in here today. Still a lot of work to do with it, obviously, but I think it's a good start. And much appreciate the time spent to Demetrius and to Jeff. Hope you're still there. Always good to have you on board, gang. And please, if you want to, just take a moment and look at my website, drcontrast.com. We've got some new things on there now. Some T-shirts are up. New prints are up. The thing is active. We still have to get our Twitch and Instagram and YouTube material on there, so that's all coming as well. But we made some good changes there, and very good to see the progress made. They've got some nice print work, very inexpensive, but we've got a variety of, I think, 8 or 10 prints in this, and T-shirts to go with it. And also, just if you have any concerns or want me to work on certain things, and show you some things throughout the course of the events here in the stream from week to week, happy to help you there. So drop me a note at jim@drcontrast.com. I'd be happy to help you. And we'll look forward to continuing on here with some of these things, changing. Maybe we'll come back to this next week, and maybe we'll change subject matter. I've had a lot of requests to do some landscape work, some aircraft work, so we'll change things around here as we go. And really appreciate the time spent, gang. So much appreciated. Hope you have a great week. And I always end the stream off by stating this because I sincerely mean it. I'll never forget to remember to dare to be great, because you are. Thanks very much, gang. Take care. We'll see you next week. Have a terrific week and all the best.